Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are really getting into it, setting aside maybe the simpler versions of history to wrestle with someone truly complex, brilliant, demanding, and honestly, often contradictory. Martin R. Delaney.
Yeah, Delaney. He gets called the father of black nationalism a lot today. And look, that title definitely captures something important, his intense pride, his demand for self-determination.
But it's not the whole story, is it?
Not even close. The sources, when you dig in, they reveal that label is, well, it's only part of the picture. Maybe even a bit misleading when you look at the sheer scope of his life and work.
So our mission today is to push past that single label. We're going to try and trace this incredible arc of his career, and it's a career just marked by this relentless drive, amazing creativity, and maybe most surprisingly, a willingness to make these sometimes baffling political shifts.
Absolutely baffling at times. But always driven, it seems, by this core pragmatic commitment to black advancement, however he defined it at the moment. Yet,
Delaney was, without a doubt, one of the top 3 or 4 African-American leaders of the 19th century, full stop.
agreed. Yet, as some critics point out, his reputation, well, it's arguably been hurt in the larger culture, certainly compared to someone like Frederick Douglass.
Why do you think that is, that pride?
That intense, maybe uncompromising race consciousness, his Pan-African identity, it didn't always fit the prevailing narratives, perhaps, but he was fundamentally a man of action. He declared, and this is key, we must make an issue, create an event, and establish for ourselves a position.
Establish for ourselves a position. That really says it all, doesn't it? He wasn't waiting around. He was trying to force history's hand.
Exactly. And we're going to see how his idea of what that position should be changed dramatically over like 4 decades.
We'll trace it through his writings, newspaper articles, his travel reports, pamphlets, those really controversial political speeches, starting in the 1840s abolitionist world, right through the messy end of Reconstruction. Okay, so to really get the foundations of Delaney's thinking, we need to start where he first built his platform, right? Pittsburgh, 1840s.
That's the place. Pittsburgh, it's where he really establishes this initial commitment to self-help, abolition, all through the power of the press. In 1843, he founds The Mystery.
Which was Pittsburgh's first African-American newspaper. That alone is significant.
Hugely significant. And it wasn't just, high-minded editorials about abolition, though it had those too. The Mystery was also this incredibly practical tool. Community building, economic visibility.
So more than just ideas, it was doing something tangible.
Very tangible. It was a 4-page paper, yes, committed to anti-slavery news, but it also served as this vital local hub. It printed announcements, information people needed.
And crucially, advertisements, right, for black workers.
Exactly. Advertisements for black laborers, professionals in Pittsburgh. Delaney got it. Abolition, freedom. It means nothing if you can't earn a living, if you don't have economic power.
And he practiced what he preached, literally advertising himself in his own paper.
Right there on the page. He regularly advertised his own medical services. Leeching, cupping, and bleeding. Think about that. In a time when black professionals were pushed to the margins, putting that ad out there was a statement.
It's like saying, we are professionals, we exist, we serve our community.
Precisely. It connects that race pride directly with this idea of domestic economy, building from within.
And he saw the need for structures, for institutions beyond just the newspaper to support this economic foundation, things outside white control.
Definitely. Which leads us to 1847. He's instrumental in setting up Pittsburgh's first black Freemasonry group, the St. Cyprian Lodge.
Okay, Freemasonry. How did that fit into his vision?
For Delaney, it was another vehicle. A way to foster black pride, sure, but also community, mutual support, and ultimately racial justice. But he didn't see it as just some local club. He framed it historically, globally.
This is where that idea of Ethiopianism starts to emerge.
Yeah.
Connecting modern black identity back to ancient Africa.
Yes, and you have to understand how radical, how intellectually dangerous this was at the time.
Why dangerous?
Because Delaney's doing this when so-called white scientists are pushing racist pseudoscience phrenology, biased archaeology, actively trying to prove black inferiority. They were arguing that the ancient Egyptians, the founders of civilization, were white.
And Delaney is pushing back, using history, using scripture, fighting them on their own ground.
Absolutely. He uses the epigraph, the wisdom of the Egyptians, right there in the Mystery. And he connects it to that famous biblical verse, Psalm 68.31, Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands unto God.
So he's publicly celebrating Black Africa, Egypt, Ethiopia as the origin of Western civilization.
Exactly. Arguing that masonry, progress, high culture, It all originates with his people. It's a direct, powerful rebuttal to the scientific racism of the day, and a huge source of pride for those lodge members.
This growing reputation, this visibility, it naturally led him to collaborate with, well, probably the most famous black man in the world then, Frederick Douglass.
Right. December 1847. Delaney joins the far-famed and world-renowned Frederick Douglass as co-editor of the North Star. They were aiming for a bigger audience, trying to bring together different abolitionist factions.
You had the moral suasion folks and those pushing for more direct political action. A tricky mix.
A very tricky mix. It was an alliance built on a shared goal ending slavery, but doomed, really, by fundamentally different ideas about how to get there.
And it didn't last long.
Just 18 months. Ended bitterly, June 1849. The core issue, ideologically, Douglass, at least in those early years, was heavily influenced by William Lloyd Garrison. Garrisonian moral suasion.
Remind us what moral suasion meant in practice.
It was the belief that you could end slavery mainly by persuading people, slaveholders, the public, of its moral evil. It generally rejected getting involved in politics, and crucially, it rejected violence.
And Delaney.
Delaney never fully adopted a moral suasionist position. Not even close. He was always a man of action. He consistently argued that black violence, armed self-defense, was a legitimate, even necessary response to white violence and oppression. He felt God's law justified it.
That alone seems like a fundamental break, advocating violence versus rejecting it.
Absolutely. Philosophically, it's almost impossible to reconcile within one newspaper, one movement. The partnership couldn't sustain that tension.
And there were personal issues too, weren't there? Leadership styles, maybe ego.
Oh, definitely. Delaney was fiercely independent, very proud. He chafed under Douglass's maybe perceived equanimity, his growing status as the black leader.
He felt Douglass was claiming too much.
Yeah, and later comments between them got quite sharp. Delaney sort of hinted that Douglass was letting others write him into fame while ignoring other leaders. It wasn't just a business split. It was a real disagreement about leadership and the path forward.
Delaney's own vision for black elevation was just so practical, almost aggressively so, and it clashed with the reliance on spirituality common at the time. This is his domestic economy idea.
Yes, and it was intense. A call for economic focus, self-reliance, almost materialism. He argued, very pointedly, and I think this quote really lands, prayer and praises only fill one's soul with emotion, but can never fill his mouth with bread, nor his pocket with money.
Whoa, wait. That's incredibly provocative for the 1840s black community, right? Where the church was often the absolute center.
Hugely provocative. He's directly challenging the idea that piety alone is the path to liberation. He's saying, look, if you want real freedom, real dignity, you need to shift focus from the spiritual to the material.
Get skills, build wealth.
Exactly. He insisted black people must become economic forces. He demanded, mechanics, we must become tradesmen, we must become farmers, we must be educated. For Delaney, economic power was the essential bedrock for any political influence, any lasting freedom.
And this wasn't just aimed at men, was it? He had specific advice for women, too.
Yes, and again, it shows his focus on the practical, the commercial, over the purely domestic sphere expected of women then. He urged young women, instead of filling their notebooks with recipes for cooking, they should be writing down invoices of merchandise.
He wanted them involved in business, in trade.
Absolutely, not just domestic service. He was trying to steer the entire black economy towards production, commerce, ownership.
And the thread tying all this together, the newspaper, the lodge, the economics, is self-representation.
Yeah.
Doing it for themselves.
That's the core. In an 1848 letter, he just lays it out. Black people must become our own representatives in presenting our own claims and making known our own wrongs. Stop waiting for white abolitionists or anyone else to do it for you.
That commitment to self-representation, that seems to be the constant, even as his strategies and locations change later on.
It's the through line of his entire complex life.
Yeah, right. So despite all this effort Delaney's putting into building institutions, demanding self-reliance within the U.S., the 1850s just bring this wave of political crushing blows.
Yeah, the political landscape just gets bleaker and bleaker for black Americans.
Totally. And these national setbacks, they're really the catalyst for his radical shift towards separatism, towards emigration, leaving the U.S. behind.
We're talking things like the Compromise of 1850, which included that brutal fugitive slave law.
The Kansas-Nebraska Act in '54, opening up new territories to slavery, and then, of course, the Dred Scott decision in 1857. It felt like the legal and political walls were closing in.
And for Delaney, this wasn't just abstract politics. He felt it directly, didn't he? The Harvard incident.
Oh, yeah. That Harvard incident in 1850 is so telling. He gets accepted into Harvard Medical School, along with two other black students. A huge step, you'd think, especially in the North.
But it didn't last. Almost immediately, they're dismissed. Why? Because white students petitioned the faculty, saying their presence was, and I quote, highly detrimental to the interests and welfare of the institution.
Wow. In Harvard.
In the free North. Exactly. It was this deeply personal public humiliation and a brutal lesson. Even in the North, prescription, racism, it was powerful.
Right.
Opportunity wasn't guaranteed anywhere.
So he saw these laws not just as ink on paper, but as real barriers affecting his own life, his own potential. His take on the fugitive slave law was particularly dark.
It was chilling. He didn't just say it was unjust. He argued that the law actually made a free black person less secure than an enslaved person.
How did he figure that? Less secure than a slave?
Think about it. A slave, at least, was property. The owner had a vested interest in protecting that property generally. But a free black person, under that 1850 law, they could be snatched up at any time, in any place, and under all circumstances.
No real due process.
None. No right to testify for yourself. No jury trial in many cases. The federal commissioner making the decision had almost arbitrary power. Their will was the law, as Delaney put it. It was terrifyingly precarious.
So the North wasn't safe. The legal system was actively hostile.
That was his conclusion. And he didn't see it as just a bad law that could be fixed. He saw the fugitive slave law as fundamental, the foundation of the compromise holding the whole country together.
Meaning repealing it was impossible without breaking the Union itself.
Pretty much. He wrote that hoping for its repeal was like anticipating an overthrow of the Confederate Union. And back in the 1850s, he didn't see that overthrow coming. So if the nation wasn't going to change...
He had to change his nation. He had to look elsewhere.
Exactly. Time to find a new location.
But when he started looking, he immediately rejected the main option already on the table for black relocation, the American Colonization Society and its colony in Liberia.
Oh, he rejected it fiercely. In classic Delaney style, uncompromising, aggressive language. He called Liberia a poor, miserable mockery, a burlesque on a government, a pitiful dependency.
A dependency on whom?
On white American colonizationists. He believed any state founded and funded by white patrons, no matter how well-intentioned they seemed, would always be fundamentally subservient, never truly sovereign.
And he criticized black leaders who went along with it.
Yeah, he did. He went after Liberia's president at the time, Joseph Jenkins Roberts, pretty hard, accused him of showing the curse of slavery in his character, basically being too subservient.
What was the evidence for that charge?
Delaney pointed to Roberts reporting back sort of dutifully to the white colonization society leaders in the U.S. For Delaney, that was proof of a lack of real independence, real self-direction. He wanted sovereignty, not polite dependency.
Okay, so America's out, Liberia's a burlesque. Where did he look first for this potential black nation?
Initially, in his 1852 pamphlet, The Condition, Elevation, Emigration, he looked south, Central and South America, the Caribbean.
Why there?
His reasoning was strategic, based on demographics and power. He argued the people there were precisely the same people as ourselves, meaning people of color, mixed-race populations. He saw it all as but one country of people of color where they were already, or could quickly become, the ruling element.
So he wasn't looking for a place to integrate peacefully. He was looking for a place where black and colored people could take charge.
That's it exactly. He wanted power, sovereignty. His motivation was just raw. To remain here and be crushed to the earth in vassalage and degradation we never will. He was finished trying to fight for dignity in a white-run country.
But that focus on Central and South America didn't last forever. Within about 7 years, he makes another big shift, doesn't he? Towards Africa.
He does. By 1859, his gaze is firmly fixed on the African continent. It seems he was always searching for the best option, the most viable place for this black empire he envisioned.
What drove the pivot to Africa specifically?
It seems to be a combination of things, maybe disillusionment with prospects in the Americas, but also a growing sense of opportunity in Africa itself. Economics played a huge role. He got funding. He actually went there, toured the Niger Valley.
And he signed a treaty?
Yes, a landmark treaty with the Alec of Abeokuta, a really powerful Yoruba ruler in what's now Nigeria, got land specifically set aside for an African-American settlement. This was the dream becoming concrete, merging American skills with African land and sovereignty.
So Delaney goes to the Niger Valley, explores, and then he writes about it in his official report of the Niger Valley Exploring Party in 1861. This sounds like a really important document.
Oh, it is. It's arguably one of the key pieces of exploratory writing by an African-American in the whole century. and he comes back with a powerful economic case:
What was the core argument?
cotton. Delaney was smart about global economics. He saw that the black race effectively held the balance of commercial power worldwide because, fundamentally, the black man is the producer of the raw material.
He's talking about cotton, sugar, tobacco, the stuff driving global industry.
Primarily cotton here. He made it concrete for his audience. He pointed out that something like 25 million people just in Great Britain relied on cotton for their jobs, their survival.
So the biggest industrial power on Earth depended directly on black labor.
Exactly. He was reframing the whole power dynamic,
Yeah.
telling black people in America and Africans, look, your labor isn't just making plantation owners rich, it's fundamental global power, and you can leverage that.
That's a powerful message, shifting from victims to potential power brokers.
Absolutely. Showing them their strategic importance went way beyond any political rights they had or didn't have in the U.S. But he didn't stop at economics. He also went hard after the stereotypes about Africa itself.
Like the idea of it being disease-ridden, the white man's grave.
Yeah, the land of pestilence idea. He tackled it practically. He said, look, a lot of the sickness Westerners experienced was due to their own erroneous ideas, like thinking they needed to drink tons of alcohol to survive, which actually made things worse.
And the climate.
He argued it wasn't uniformly sultry, and that with proper living habits, things educated African Americans could bring it was perfectly healthy. More than that, he deliberately reported on the advanced civilization he saw, particularly among the Yoruba people.
What did he highlight?
Their complex language, their sophisticated manners and politeness, their widespread industry. He painted a picture of a functioning, organized society ready for partnership, not a backward place needing rescue.
And all this, the economics, the debunking of stereotypes it builds towards his really famous radical policy statement, Africa for the African race and black men to rule them.
That's the ultimate expression of his nationalist vision at this point. He concluded that what Africa needed most wasn't more white missionaries. He felt their work was basically done once they'd set up a few schools.
So what did it need, in his view?
It needed selected intelligent people from the United States, skilled African Americans bringing capital, education, organizational skills, industrial knowledge.
To basically jumpstart a modern, independent African nation.
Pretty much. Their role was to guide and direct the industry, build institutions, and forge a national identity completely free from European or American control. This Africa project, it felt like the culmination of everything he'd been working towards. True sovereignty, far away from American racism.
This level of radicalism, this commitment to bold action, it put him in the orbit of other major figures, didn't it? Including John Brown.
Yes, the John Brown connection is just fascinating. They collaborated particularly around the Chatham Convention in Canada in 1858.
What was Brown planning at Chatham?
Brown had this audacious revolutionary plan. He wanted to set up a base, maybe in the Appalachians, and essentially make Kansas, not Canada, the destination for the Underground Railroad. He wanted to fight for freedom, militarily, on U.S. soil, test the right to freedom by force.
And he saw Delaney as someone who could help make this happen.
Absolutely. Brown clearly respected Delaney's strategic mind and reputation for action. He offered Delaney a position in his provisional government's army.
What position?
Major general.
Major General. In John Brown's Revolutionary Army. That's incredible. It shows how highly Brown, and likely others, regarded him.
It really does. It puts Delaney right at the center of the most radical abolitionist planning imaginable.
Given Delaney's own past arguments for using violence against slavery, you'd think he would jump at that chance. Why did he turn Brown down?
It seems to boil down to timing and his primary commitment at that specific moment. This was 1858. Delaney said no because he was fully invested in his African exploration movement, which was already planned and funded.
So he prioritized the nation-building project in Africa over the insurrection project in America.
At that point, yes. He seemed to believe that building a sovereign nation overseas, using capital and structure, offered a more lasting path to racial destiny than an armed uprising within the U.S., which he might have feared would just lead to more bloodshed without achieving true independence. It was a strategic choice, albeit a fascinating one. But then, of course, the Civil War erupts, and everything changes. By '63, with the Emancipation Proclamation, the massive scale of the war, Delaney starts to see that the collapse of the old Union he'd kind of predicted back in the 50s, well, it was actually happening.
And that collapse opened up a new possibility, a path to dignity within America through military service.
Exactly. The game had changed. So he pivots again. His focus snaps back to the American continent.
And this leads to that incredible meeting with President Lincoln in February 1865, just months before the war ends. What did Delaney propose?
It was audacious. He didn't just ask for a commission for himself. He proposed a whole strategy. Create an army composed entirely of black soldiers, led entirely by black officers.
An all-black army unit, led by black officers, in 1865.
Yes, with maybe a few white officers willing to serve under them, if any volunteered. And this force wasn't just for show.
What was its mission?
To march deep into the South. As Delaney put it, proclaiming freedom as they go, sustaining and protecting it by arming the emancipated. It was envisioning this internal, black-led military force securing liberation on the ground.
And Lincoln agreed.
Lincoln, likely seeing the war winding down and needing bold moves, approved the concept.
Which resulted in Delaney getting that historic commission.
Major Martin Delaney, 104th USCT United States Colored Troops, one of the highest-ranking black officers in the entire Union Army.
You really have to pause and appreciate the symbolism of that moment.
Absolutely. There's this contemporary description of him that just captures it. Major Delaney, black as the blackest large heavy set, and the key part, and he wears brass buttons and shoulder straps.
The uniform of command, worn by a proudly black man. The visual impact must have been just stunning.
Revolutionary. As one source put it, that single image, that commission, it recorded the history of the progress of the country during the war. It was black citizenship, black leadership, earned in battle, embodied in that uniform. The man who'd advocated leaving America was now a major in its army.
Amazing. So the war ends. Delaney immediately goes to work for the Freedmen's Bureau, right, down in South Carolina, taking that military victory and trying to turn it into economic reality.
Yes, and his focus was laser sharp.
Hmm.
Land. Land for the freed people.
This was his core idea for Reconstruction.
Absolutely. He pushed for freedmen to get their own small farms, suggesting maybe 10 acres on average. He argued that breaking up the massive plantations and distributing the land, dividing the wealth, was the only way to build real economic strength and political independence for black people.
He looked to other models.
Yeah, he pointed to New England farmers, arguing their success came from owning and working their own small plots. It was about ownership and self-sufficiency.
But how to make this happen in the chaos of the post-war South, with all the resistance and lack of capital? This is where he comes up with that.
Well, that really pragmatic idea, the Triple Alliance.
The Triple Alliance. It was designed to be practical, to get things moving, despite the racial tensions. The structure was Northern investors supply the capital, Southern landowners, the old planters, supply the land, and black people supply the labor.
Okay, capital, land, labor. But what was the key innovation?
The profit sharing. Delaney insisted that the net profits had to be shared equally among all three parts. Capital gets a third, land gets a third, and crucially, labor gets a third.
So the freedmen's labor wasn't just wages, it was an equal partnership stake in the enterprise. That's radical.
Deeply radical for the time. And here's the amazing part, it actually worked, sometimes.
He found partners for this, even among former Confederates.
The sources mention a former Confederate colonel, a guy named Colcock, who actually negotiated a contract with Delaney to use black labor on this Triple Alliance basis. A Union major and a Confederate colonel making a deal based on equal profit sharing with black labor just after the war.
It shows Delaney's incredible pragmatism. He was willing to work with anyone, even a recent enemy, if the deal secured fair economic terms and a path to dignity for the freedmen. Results matter more than past loyalties.
Which brings us, I guess, to the most challenging part of his story for many people. His political maneuvering in South Carolina during Reconstruction. It seems almost contradictory.
It is jarring. Initially, he sides with the Republicans, the party of Lincoln. In 1874, he runs for lieutenant governor on an independent Republican ticket.
What was his platform then?
He campaigned explicitly on bringing about a union of the two races, white and black, in one common interest in the state, trying to build a functional biracial state. He lost, but the intent was clear.
But then comes 1876, the really shocking move. After everything Union officer, Republican candidate, he endorses the Democratic candidate for governor, Wade Hampton, a former Confederate general.
Yeah, this is the moment that makes your head spin. Why? Why would Martin Delaney, of all people, endorse the party tied to slavery, white supremacy, and violently suppressing black rights?
What was his reasoning? Or his rationalization?
He'd become completely disgusted with the Republican Party machine in South Carolina. He saw it as deeply corrupt. He accused Northern Yankees, Republicans, and radicals, as he called them, of just using black voters, stirring things up with demagoguery for their own gain, not genuinely helping black people long term.
So he thought the Republicans were actually more harmful at that point than the Democrats under Hampton.
That seems to have been his calculation, a deeply controversial one. He believed the corrupt Republican government was holding black South Carolinians back more than a Southern Democrat like Hampton, who, Delaney claimed, had pledged equal and impartial justice to everyone,
Whether Hampton meant that is another question entirely.
of course. But Delaney seemed to believe, or chose to believe, that Hampton offered a quicker path out of corruption, even if it meant aligning with former Confederates. It was an extreme gamble based purely on perceived pragmatism.
And this decision almost cost him his life, didn't it?
It did. He was at a Hampton rally, and shots were fired by a black militia group furious about his endorsement. He barely escaped, yet even after that, he defended his choice.
Yeah.
He argued basically, I came here with my sword to fight for black freedom. If a Democrat gives me a better shot at securing actual justice and good government right now than a corrupt Republican, then the party label doesn't matter. For him, the ultimate goal, black self-determination, black well-being, always trumped party loyalty. Always.
So Reconstruction ends disastrously. His political gamble in South Carolina ultimately fails to protect black rights in the long run. And what happens to Delaney? He seems to revisit his old ideas.
He does. In the late 1870s, you see this renewed interest in emigration. He gets involved with something called the Azore Expedition, which aimed to take black immigrants to Liberia.
Liberia, the place he called a burlesque years earlier.
The very same. And even later, into 1880, he was apparently still trying to get government positions that might help fund his own move back to Africa. It really feels like he came full circle, disillusioned with the American experiment once again.
And his final major written work comes out around this time too, right? Principia of Ethnology in 1879. How does that fit in?
It's like a philosophical capstone to his life's work. It brings together his earliest ideas about Ethiopianism, about the ancient greatness of Africa, and presents them in this systematic, almost anthropological framework.
Still asserting the African origins of civilization.
Absolutely. He argues that the original races, yellow, black, white, descended from Noah's sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth. But he completely flips the script on the racist cursed Ham narrative that was used to justify slavery.
How'd he flip it?
He used history, theology, powerful symbols to claim nobility and a high destiny for the black race, for Ham's descendants.
What kinds of symbols?
He pointed out, for instance, that Jesus Christ himself was sheltered and saved in Africa, Egypt, when Herod tried to kill him as a baby. The Christian faith itself was preserved on African soil.
Wow, that reframes things.
And he noted it was Simon of Cyrene, an African, who helped carry the cross for Jesus. He used these moments to argue for Africa's absolute centrality to salvation history, to high civilization, directly confronting all the narratives of degradation. It's a final, powerful assertion of black pride and destiny.
So when you look back at this whole incredible, complex life, what's the enduring takeaway? It's this constant tension, isn't it?
It really is. On one hand, this unwavering, fierce pride in blackness, this absolute refusal to accept inferiority or subservience. On the other hand, this stunning, sometimes shocking political and economic pragmatism.
Doing whatever he thought would work at that moment.
Seems like it. But always driven by that core belief he stated. The claims of any people won't be respected until they can present themselves from a position of strength, ideally as a nation.
And he believed deeply that the redemption of the bondmen depends entirely upon the elevation of the freemen. Uplifting the race was the goal.
Exactly. And the methods could change drastically. If being an abolitionist editor worked, fine. If armed revolution seemed necessary, he considered it. If building a nation in Africa was the path, he pursued it.
And if wearing a Union Army uniform or even endorsing a Democrat seemed like the best strategic move for black elevation in that specific context, he'd do it.
He would. The willingness to shift tactics so dramatically, editor, separatist, soldier, political operator, back to emigrationist, while holding on to that core vision of black self-determination, it makes him incredibly challenging to categorize.
But also maybe incredibly relevant, that adaptability.
Perhaps. His life certainly demonstrates that for him, political loyalty was always secondary to the desired outcome for his people. The only absolute was freedom, dignity, self-determination.
His perspective is just essential, really, for understanding that whole tumultuous century and the ongoing struggle for liberation. And maybe we can boil down that ultimate commitment, that absolute priority, with that one powerful quote of his.
The one that really cuts to the bone. We had rather be a heathen freeman than a Christian slave.
Yeah. freedom, self-determination above all else, even religious conformity. It was a challenge then, and it's definitely a provocative thought to leave you with now. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the fascinating, difficult world of Martin R. Delaney.